So glad to get out of that dang time travel machine.
Where'd you go?
I went back to the 80s to grab some of that good sports merch from my favorite defunct franchises. I spent my life savings on that machine.
You bought a time travel machine to buy sports merchandise.
Yeah, gladly.
You know you could have gone to 503 Sports, right? The website?
Yeah, no, I didn't think of that at all.
Yeah, they sell all sorts of throwback sports merch from leagues like the World Football League, XFL, UFL, and the Arena Football League, several others.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, they sell hats, shirts, even custom jerseys from all sorts of vintage sports teams.
Oh, man, I spent like a lot of money on that time travel machine.
Well, look, listeners of AFL Rewind get 10% off their first order by using the promo code ARENAFAN at checkout. That might help you out.
Yeah, it does.
Go on over to 503-sports.com and get your merch today.
Do you know anyone who wants to buy like a overpriced time travel machine?
No, sorry, I don't.
Welcome to AFL Rewind, a look back at all things arena football, sponsored by Phenom Elite. I'm your host, Tim Capper. When you look back at the NFL and what they have done, to become the juggernaut that they had, they wanted to make sure that fans were able to see the highlights and the game films of all the games that occurred in a certain week or during the playoffs or a Super Bowl. And obviously, during that time, NFL films became a huge part of the lexicon that is the NFL today. This episode, we're going to be speaking with a gentleman who was trying to become the Steve Sable of the Arena Football League. He is a director and a filmmaker that produced a series of mini documentaries that highlighted not necessarily the game itself, but also the different stories that were out there in the AFL. We're going to be finding out his motivation for the series and what it was like to be a fan covering the Arena Football League. We're going to be speaking with Ben Fraternale. On this episode of the podcast, we're going to be speaking with a guy I'm sure you know if you happen to listen to the last couple seasons of the AFL Tonight podcast. This gentleman probably would have been known as the Steve Sable of the Arena Football League, considering how much footage he took of the AFL, the different documentaries that he put together. But we want to find out about that and more, obviously, about this gentleman. With us, we are talking to Ben Fraternale. Hey, Ben, thanks for joining us, man.
Timmy boy, it is great to be back on the mic with you. It's almost like we're in the same room, even though we never have been recording.
You're right.
It's just like a little family reunion.
Yeah, exactly. Just missing our other member, John.
Yeah, John. We're in his thoughts, I'm sure, and his heart always. Yeah.
Obviously, this episode is about you, my friend, because you, as I said, and I don't know what. Let me ask you this question though. How does it make you feel when somebody says to you that you're the Steve Sable of the AFL?
It is literally everything I could have ever hoped someone to say. And like the first time people started like saying that sort of casually, I was like, oh my God, this is like exactly the direction I want people's minds to be when they look at this stuff, because the mission initially was I'm not just creating like highlight tapes.
Right.
I'm not just creating reels of AFL footage. I'm making films. And so the reason NFL films grew to such a rich popularity in history was because of its texture and its content and its personal nature and all of those things that I was trying to sort of inject into 50-Yard Dash. So it basically means everything, because from the jump, that's exactly what I wanted.
Yeah. Now, before we talk about 50-Yard Dash, et cetera, and how it expanded and grew in the short amount of time that you did it, First of all, what was your history when it came to the arena football? Because, I mean, dude, I've known you for years. I mean, even when you were a little tyke, we didn't know, we knew each other, but we didn't know each other, that sort of thing. But how did your fandom with arena football get started?
Yeah, so it was one of those things where I was very little. I mean, I think I was 9 maybe when I saw my first AFL game on TV. it was one of those things. I just flipped the channel, saw it. I thought, what am I looking at right now? This is just, I mean, that's what I think what a lot of people experience when they first see the AFL. It was like, what is this? I have to keep looking at this. And it was the Dallas Desperados were on. And I was like, is this some sort of variant of the Dallas Cowboys? It just piqued my interest right away. I just got right into it. And I think within a couple of weeks, I was at my first New York Dragons game, which was my local team at the time. And I'm a kind of person who just keeps diving deeper and deeper, like you, Tim, with our passions. You take something that you're passionate about and you just keep digging. And I was like that all my life. So at 9 years old, I'm making little cards that the players can sign. I'm designing them in like Photoshop CS1 or whatever the hell it was. I created a website, Arena Pulse, and I was basically lying about my age and recruiting AFL writers to come write articles for the site. They thought I was some 40-year-old guy. I was just like a little kid at his keyboard. And so I started just getting into the media aspect of the AFL and making a podcast before, we really called them podcasts. They were just like audio shows. And then I was making video shows where I was interviewing players. And so I was getting really close to the game, like beyond just being a fan. And the New York Dragons, much to their credit, despite the fact that I was just some kid, probably when I was 16 years old, were like, hey, do you want to be like our official like media spokesperson fan guy? Like a guy that we just like have at all our events, comes to the games, records whatever he wants, makes the content that he wants. And so that was like such a door opener for me because I'm like, oh, damn, okay, I could really do this. And then the Dragons and the AFL hit a major wall. This is a full history, but we're doing it right now. And they went away. And so the Albany Firebirds were all we had, a 2-hour drive, the upstart Albany Firebirds of the AF2.
But correct.
Rebranded Albany
the
Firebirds.
Conquest.
Yeah.
The Conquest.
Yeah, the Conquest. Formerly of the Conquest, now the Firebirds for one season. And so the Firebirds were as open or more than the Dragons. They were like, okay, we're going to put your stuff on our website. We're going to feature you, give you whatever access you want. So I was in the locker room. I was in post-game every game. My parents were driving me up there. Like, I much credit to them because they were like totally game for this, driving me 2 hours to this friggin' AF2 games. And my friend Jeff Friedlander, who was holding the camera. And so we were interviewing, Christian Wise, Alvin Ray Jackson, Clint Dozell, like anyone who was in that AF2 period right before that kind of became the AFL again. So it was like such great exposure. And then I went to college and it took me a few years to get back into the media of the AFL. But then I finally did with 50-Yard Dash.
Now, at any point, did you feel that they were saying, well, this is, you're just a kid, you don't know what you're talking about, that type of thing? Or because it seemed like you've had a good experience from the get-go.
Yeah, honestly, from the team's end of it, it's always been really positive. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I think part of it is like the AFL was always looking, and team and PR people were always looking for whatever exposure they could get, and teams were very bad at creating their own media.
Yeah.
This was like pre-YouTube, so it's not like everyone had someone ready to make a YouTube channel for the team and getting great post-game content and stuff. They just didn't have any of it. So they saw a kid who, I don't know, was willing to do it for free basically and was like, all right, well, let him do it. The only times I really ran into walls were, security would look at my press pass and be like, no way this kid is, no way this kid is of age. Like they literally were like, let me see your ID. I would show them my ID and they'd be like, this is your father. I'm not letting you in.
Oh my
It was mostly
God.
security problems. And honestly, more credit to the players too, because the players took it seriously too. And that was actually the most gratifying thing because they weren't just like, oh, some kid's trying to interview me for his class project. They were giving me honest answers, maybe even being like slightly more open than they would normally because I was just a kid and their guard was down. And so I remember, going to Dragons practices and their tryouts and stuff, and Waylon Harding, the coach, was messing around with me because he was like, oh, it's Ben, we'll say anything. I actually did get in trouble once because a player texted me that they were sitting out the next week.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, okay, so I'm media. This is information. I'm going to post it. So I posted it on the AFL message boards. And the player called me like right after I did that. I guess the team found out or something. He's like, why'd you do that, man? Like, come on, man. And so, there were some lessons to be learned along the way. But I eventually, curved the craft, and everyone treated me throughout the whole process with a lot of respect, which I really appreciate in retrospect.
And you were saying, even though that this is before YouTube, I think somewhere on the dark YouTube web, your interview with Clint Dolezel is there some. I don't remember where I found it, but it's out there.
It is.
And the one with Christian Wise, I think, is out there too. And a couple of your shows that you would do.
Yeah. There's a bunch of Firebird stuff that's still online. I think you search Firebird's Nest.
Yeah.
That was what the website was called. And so a bunch of that stuff is still up, but all the Dragon stuff, unfortunately, was pretty much on Google Video, which is a defunct video service that predates YouTube. And that was a huge mistake. The only reason I used Google Video is because my high school blocked YouTube. So I was like hamstrung and I couldn't use YouTube at school. So I used Google Video and it screwed me. I don't even know how to get most of those videos now. I don't know where they are.
That sucks too. Yeah. It's like what we've done recently, or what's been done recently on YouTube, unearthing some of these games that haven't been seen in such a long time. It's a part, makes you wonder, is that interview with Clint Dolezel, is that the holy grail of Ben Fraternale stuff, or is it, is it something else? But tell me about your experience. Because I know you told this to me before, and I just said that with the experiences that you had leading up to when the league folded back in 2008, you actually had the chance to go to I guess we could say the relaunching, so to speak, of the New York Dragons when they changed their branding. What was your experience like that, considering that's leading up to when you're about to find out that the league's about to fold?
Yeah, that was so surreal. I was in like English class or something, and I get this, my phone starts ringing, and normally I wouldn't do this, obviously, but I just walked out of class, and it was like a representative from the Dragons, and they were like, hey, tomorrow or in 2 days we're doing this press conference. We'd like you to be there. And my head was like started spinning at 360 degrees. And I was like, oh my God. I called my mom and she was like, yeah, we'll take you. It's one of those things where would you rather be in school learning nothing of value or doing this like major life experience? So we just called out sick, pretended I was sick. And we went to this press conference. And I think about that press conference all the time because it was such a weird moment. Like you said, it was right before the AFL folded, the way the AFL as we know it. So they're unveiling this branding. They've got Kerry Rhodes there as like part owner of the team. They're talking about all of these things that I wanted them to say. They were saying everything I wanted them to say about how they were going to manage the Dragons, what the AFL was going to be going forward, how positive it was going to be, the merchandising, how on it they were going to be, jerseys, shirts, all the little things that I really wanted to happen. It looked like they were going to make happen. And, not to mention I was there. They were giving me a shout out. I was interviewing the owners and the coaches and the players. And it was such like a glitzy experience. I was just on a high of high. So for right after that, the league to collapse, that was just, obviously, one of the most devastating things I'd ever experienced to that point in my life. I was so upset, and everyone was upset, and it felt so hopeless because nobody had any agency. It wasn't like the fans could band together and create a petition.org and get the league back on board. It was like a unanimous decision that was made behind closed doors. So it was really an interesting experience to look back on, and something that I will never forget as a kid being able to do that. And thank God the AF2 existed for that 1 year because that was big for me because being able to transition into that.
For sure. No, exactly. And you have a little bit of time off, as you go through college, stuff like that. You're able to hone your skills a little bit. Now, it leads up to I guess, where you're coming out, so to speak, when it comes to your filmmaking in this thing that you introduced, which is called, your 50-Yard Dash documentary back in 2016. What were your thoughts for this? How did you come up with the idea, and then how did you go about getting all the footage that you needed for this?
Yeah, I was actually at a doctor's appointment for like a leg injury or something, and it was just one of those things where I was just kind of out of it, and my mind was just wandering, and I was just thinking about, time I might have off coming forward because, and I was just wandering and thinking, oh, what is something I could do like a documentary on, and it just sort of struck me. The AFL season was a month away at that time, and I was like, let me just look up the rosters, like let me crunch back into this and really sort of find if there's a story anywhere here that's not just like about the league, because I didn't want to just do like a league commercial.
Right.
And I found that Christian Wise, who at the time was in training camp with the Philadelphia Soul, was going to face off against Alvin Ray Jackson, who was on the Jacksonville Sharks. And so both of these guys had been on the Firebirds when I was in the AF2, and this was 8 years gone, and a lot of players by that time had retired and stuff, and I was like, wow, what are the odds these two guys are meeting up? The two guys I was closest with on the Firebirds, and Christian Wise, a guy I was still in touch with pretty regularly. And so I was just thinking, damn, this might be a really interesting narrative to do something about these guys meeting, and through that story and through their stories sort of tell the story of the AFL and what it's like to be a player in the AFL. And I texted them like that hour. I was like, I have this idea, I'm attacking. That's like how I do stuff.
Yeah.
And so they were like, oh yeah, absolutely, bro. Like, we'll figure it out. And immediately I was figuring out the logistics of traveling to Philly and then filming training camp and getting their interviews and booking hotel rooms. And it was just one of those things where I just went full court press, because a big part of me felt like I wasn't done yet with the AFL, like covering the AFL, and I knew there was still an avenue to explore there that was more fitting and respectful and cinematic and personal than anything I had done when I was in high school. Now I was like an adult man, and I was like, maybe I could do something now that's better than that. And so that sort of launched 50 Yard Dash.
What was it? Because you have had a pretty big background when it comes to film and stuff like that, because your past history when it comes to commercials and stuff that's tied to commercials also, whether it be graphics or packaging and stuff like that. But had you ever done something like this before outside? Because I know you have shot some other films before, but this type of idea when it comes to, because tell the people the process, because say like one of the other films that you may have done, one of your short films that you may have done of the commercials, how would you compare it to doing this, what at the moment was a single documentary, which got bigger from there, but how did it compare?
That's a great question. I mean, it was a really interesting experience, because when you're writing a narrative script and you're going and shooting it, you have so much control over it. And, I was still somewhat early in my career, but I had made several films and I had worked on several commercials. And so I had a good groundwork for what I was doing, but I had never done a long form isn't the right word, but longer documentary short that was like almost 20 minutes.
Right.
I'd never done anything like that. I'd done some short 5-minute stuff, but this required, somewhat planning, in the sense that what are the themes that you want to explore, and what do you hope that these guys say, or what do you hope they express? And the process of interviewing them and then having to sort of reckon with their perspectives, which are obviously always going to be different than whatever you thought you were scripting, which is nonsense once you get to it. You can guide an interview all you want, as you know, but in the end, the person is going to dictate sort of what they're willing to say or what emotion they're willing to express. And you have to find that through the interview, and then you're left with all these pieces, and you got to film all this additional material. And
right.
This is like so different than shooting a film, which you have a 3-day shoot schedule. You get it done, blah, blah, blah. It's in the can, and then you edit. This was like going to games, going to training camp, going to practices, getting multiple interviews. It was such a different sourcing footage, such a different experience, and so much more work. But in the end, I think it was a more rewarding experience, not only because I was doing something about a league that I loved so much, but because I feel like I learned so much just doing that. And I think it made everything I did after that so much better.
So basically you learned quite a bit from it then, because before this you had shot how many short films before that, or commercials before that? Do you remember?
I mean, it was a lot. I would say I probably made like 10 to 15 films by that point, just like
Okay.
short films, and
Yeah.
then a bunch of commercial work. But it was not anything on this scale or this amount of material. And I did learn so much from it. And I think something that I really hold dear to me is that everything I did around the AFL taught me a lot.
Yeah.
It was, whether it was web design when I was first making that website, podcasting when I was learning how to, make audio shows, whether it was the video shows, doing those first video shows for the AFL, completely taught me how to do it. Whether it was design with the cards that I was making for the players to sign, all these skills that I learned that ultimately led me to a career in directing and editing basically started with the AFL, which is crazy, but it's so awesome because it's something that will never be taken away, that I grew through the league like that.
Yeah. How much total time, because I don't think I've ever asked you this question, how much was the total time editing for the original documentary?
It's a great question. I would say, I mean, it was at least a couple months. It's hard to put hours or anything on that,
Yeah.
but it was at least once a day I was putting in serious work on it. And every little piece takes so long, especially there was animated sequences and audio editing and sound mixing and color correction. You're doing all this stuff yourself. Obviously, I wasn't like hiring a post-production crew to help me. So the intricacies of all of that also just helped me develop that workflow. And after that, not that the other documentaries going forward were as sort of complex as that one, but I feel like my workflow got much better because of what I learned through editing that one.
What was your reaction? Because I remember, you and I have been talking and about when you had been teasing it and stuff like that. What was your initial reaction? Not necessarily from the fans itself, but from the league and from the players when the original documentary came out.
It was really, really gratifying. I mean, I think the reaction to 50-Yard Dash, the original, was what made me want to keep doing it. Like the original concept of 50-Yard Dash wasn't really to do a series. It was like, I'm going to do this short documentary. Maybe this is a jumping off point to doing a feature one day, but at the very least, I want to do this one unit of thing. I'm just doing this one thing. And so everyone's really warm reaction to it. And the fact that it successfully represented the story of being a player in the AFL for so many players meant so much to me that I felt like, wow, I gotta keep going. Like, I can't just stop here. And the other thing to your question about the league's reaction, that was really interesting because I felt like I was doing something kind of cheeky. Like, I released this, I didn't tell anyone in the league. The only team, I mean, the Jacksonville Sharks and the Philadelphia Soul knew what I was doing, obviously, but the league didn't really know. So I didn't know what their reaction was going to be. There's copyrighted stuff in that documentary. I didn't necessarily think they were going to like sue me or something, but there was certainly a question about that. And at first I didn't hear much from them. I just heard sort of through the grapevine that people were digging it. But the other thing that was a little bit wary about was there's some stuff in the documentary that's pretty negative. I mean, there's stuff that's about, people being separated from their families. Yeah. That's not the AFL's fault. But what might be the AFL's fault was pay being really low, having it be very difficult to live a healthy and safe life and have a family on the salary of an AFL player, let alone someone who's injured or on practice squad or something like that. And so it was very revealing and at times very serious and sort of a dissection of what it's like to be an athlete in this league in both positive and negative light. So at the time, I wasn't really sure. A few months later, after I was sort of inspired to start doing more videos, the league did contact me. And I was very excited because like, oh my God, someone's finally reaching out. And this guy was like asking me about it. And it was a nice conversation. It was going really well. And then he sort of like hinted that he was actually kind of a lawyer. And he was like of picking my brain about like, what legal stuff that I had prepared. And I was like, oh my God, of course. And you think of the administration of the AFL in 2016, it wasn't like the best of the best in terms of what we ultimately had, which was something a little bit more tightened up and professional. So I don't think the league reacted super well initially, but down the road, thankfully, it all paid off.
And I think this goes to, in my opinion, where the league basically was given a gift horse. They're basically given something, a total gift to them, and they did not react. They didn't do anything with it, considering that they're getting positive press. Documentaries are not always positive.
Right.
But they are getting positive press. It's something that's made about the AFL. This is something that had not been done since 2000 when, a day in the life of arena football, or whatever it was called, was done on TNN back in 2000. So
yeah, it was crazy.
And it's a different league, completely different league.
Right.
So and to me, as talking to you as being the filmmaker who did this, and then again referencing you as being the Steve Sable of the AFL, it makes you wonder the story that Sable may have gone through at the very beginning also when he started. But mind you, times are different, right? Times are completely different.
I mean, the story of NFL Films was they bought their way in, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, they purchased the ability to film the NFL, and so they sort of got the NFL like that. I thought my strategy, obviously, wouldn't be to do that. It would be to put something in front of them that they can't ignore. I really wanted to show them something that they couldn't just twiddle their thumbs and never acknowledge. Like something that's powerful, something that is so different, and something that is really high value to them.
Yeah.
And ultimately, actually, toward the end of the first season, thankfully, the league did actually start adding the films to their website, which I did appreciate. I thought that was great. I mean, obviously, they didn't pay me anything at the time, but I liked that the league was finally acknowledging it officially, uploading them to their TV service and ultimately their app. And so that was a holdover for me until later when I had much better relations with them. But
yes.
The teams were always super in on it. That was the best part. Was the Philadelphia Soul were promoting the videos, posting the videos. I've covered the Soul a lot in 2016 and 2017. Yeah. So they were posting stuff like crazy. The people who worked for the teams were really nice to me at all times. So that and the players' reaction were sort of the fulfillment that I needed at the time.
And it's funny you say that, because I think anybody who knows the league as well as we do knows that in the later years, that was kind of the case with the AFL, where, again, as I said, there was a gift given to them. They didn't do anything with it. And, the teams were always supportive. Whether you were a small website covering the league, or whether you were, as I said, yourself being a filmmaker, the teams were always loved this. It's like they were totally running independently than the league office themselves. There
was no unified philosophy, and the teams were operating as kind of small businesses in a way. If someone shows you a commercial that they made for your small business, you're going to be like, "Oh my God, thank you! This would have cost $10,000 to $200,000 to make."
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. I'm going to share it, and I'm going to give you merchandise or whatever, and acknowledge you. And the league was just not like that. There were this weird, especially at that time, this weird Las Vegas office thing where no one really knew if they were actually there, and it felt like no one had a true personal connection to the commissioner. And so it was a weird time, but we did get out of that period, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah, we did. Now, from there, you obviously you had your game films also, which I think started right after the success of the original documentary. Were you disappointed that you were just doing game film before you started your new series of mini docs, or were you just biding your time, looking at different things that you could do while you were doing the game film?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it was. So the game films, for those who haven't seen them, are sort of cinematic recaps of the games in a way. It's sort of a highlight reel, but done, in slow motion, epic shots, all that stuff, big music, announcer audio. It's a clean edited thing, but it doesn't have significance to it really beyond that. The times when I really liked those were if I was covering an arena bowl or a playoff game, because that is a very significant thing that's happening to cover. So I felt that was warranted doing a game film. But like you said, while I was doing that, which I did through the end of 2016 because I was trying to create supporting content for the documentary and sort of keep people interested in 50-yard dash. I was thinking, well, what can I do next? What is the next narrative doc piece, basically? And so I went in sort of two directions. The first thing I did was The Kicker, which was a 4-part documentary short series about kickers in the AFL, which in retrospect, to be honest, I'm not sure if that was the right thing to do. I don't think I think that was like a niche of a niche in a way. Like it wasn't like, it's not like anyone was really asking what's like the life of a kicker in the AFL. So I was sort of answering a question that nobody was asking. And so I acknowledge that in retrospect, but thankfully I did move on. I mean, as much I do like that series and I love the guys that I interviewed, but I'm just saying. So yeah, my brain just started going bigger with it, and what could I do next? And so I did expand into this 50-yard shorts series.
Yeah.
And that was more in line with the original 50-yard dash thing, which is you got interviews, you're telling an individual story or the story of a group of guys. And that was where I knew that the power of 50-yard dash really was. It was actually telling like full stories, getting those things on film, and doing something that the league had never had, like we were saying. And that, I think, just doing that's when I blew the doors open, in a sense. Like, that's when I felt like I completely was in, and the league and the teams were like totally in on it. And I mean, the Empire State, which was the first one I released, is to this day, I think, one of the most important things that I've ever done for my like personal life, because it was about Albany. It was about a team that, sort of a team that I had been working for when I was, 16, 17 years old, and that connection all coming back around with their first game. And it was all there. Like, it was so there. And there's not always tons of dramatic stories like that in the AFL, where the stakes aren't as high necessarily as the NFL. And so that story, to me, epitomizes what I could do. And from there, I kept jumping on it.
The Arena Football Hall of Fame has returned, and we want you to become a part of the family. Introducing the Arena Football Hall of Fame Patreon. Whether an All-Star or a Hall of Famer, our reasonably priced tiers each have their own exclusive perks. Early access to the AFL Rewind podcast, honorary selection committee member, and much more. Help us build a Hall of Fame we'll all be proud of. Head to patreon.com/AF Hall of Fame to join. Why are you, and you're not really talking bad about it, but to you, why do you think that the Kicker series does not stand up to, or as you don't hold it as high on the pedestal as you do the 50-yard short series? I mean, they're very similar in a way. They are still telling a story.
Yeah, they're actually very similar. I mean,
do you feel that you should have gone with not necessarily just kickers, but other players, type of players, like one of the head coaches?
I wonder if, like you're saying, like if I did head coaches and that was like a set of stories, or I did the quarterbacks a set of stories. Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I think the kicker would have been an interesting episode, but by the time I was editing the 4th episode, I was like, I feel like I already told this story. That was the issue with it. Okay, is that it was 4 episodes where guys were sort of echoing each other. And there was something I really liked about that, actually. I liked that the 4 episodes of The Kicker intertwined with each other a lot. Yes. Like, that's really cool. Like, that's something I always wanted to do, was like, you've got players referencing other players, they're interviewed, people are mixing, and you see footage of both of them together. And so I really liked that aspect of it. I just think once I got to the Empire State and I made that, it was so obvious, like, what I could do, and maybe I should have done that a little bit earlier. But I don't regret it. I think all of it was all a learning process.
Any challenges for obviously for the Kicker series versus the original doc? Is there anything that you came across where you're like, well, I can't believe this is being done this way, or I'm doing this that way? What were the differences that you may have noticed when it came to, I mean, editing aside, because obviously you're getting better at that, but and your storytelling is getting better too. But anything that you noticed in between the 2 series before you got to the other one?
It taught, I think the biggest thing I noticed and the biggest like thing I learned through doing those was you're putting all of your money on an individual being able to like talk really well for 15 minutes or, an hour when I'm interviewing them. And the guys that I got were great, but it's like just their perspective. And that was sort of a concern of mine going into it. There are a couple episodes where multiple people are interviewed, and that was like really big. But the thing I always wanted to avoid was only having sort of one perspective. And ultimately I sort of fell into that trap because the Malachi and TT Tolliver ones are one perspective. But besides that,
it's a different story though. Well, it's a different story. That's a different type of story though.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a different type of story. And for those, I think it was warranted to do it that way.
Yeah.
But I think it just taught me a lot about doing like a series and how to sort of intertwine things and how to get certain things out of people that might not be super comfortable just like putting a camera in front of their face, and learning how to finesse interviews. And I actually really liked the interviews from the kicker because those guys were willing to like work with me and open up a little bit over time. And they were really excited to do it. And everybody was always really excited to do it. So that wasn't always a problem. But I think all the stuff I learned from editing the kicker contributed to why I think that the 50-yard short series are better. It's like everything you do, you take another step up.
Right. At any other time, was the kicker series going to be about something else, or had you always been dead set on doing the kicker series next?
That was definitely just a decision that I had made. Like I was saying before, like my mode is I make that decision, and then I just like do it. And so that's exactly what I did. I contacted the 4 kickers that I wanted to use or feature, and I just did it. But while I was probably 3 episodes in, that was when I started thinking maybe I could have made the kicker one story. And I still think about that a lot. Like, could I edit that into just like a half-hour documentary or something? But was this the right thing to do over 4 episodes? I was thinking about that, but at the beginning it was always going to be, let's do this about kickers.
Yeah. Then what I would probably say is your biggest break, because at the time, you haven't, everybody should know your name from the original series and then what you did with the kicker series. You're on a weekly podcast during the season. We introduced, John Stark also, who will be helping you in the future when it comes to some of these new documentaries. Mm-hmm. How did the idea for the Empire State one come about? I mean, was it just all of a sudden a light bulb went off, or just thinking about how your history went from the original to where you went to the kicker to, I need to do something else that's big that people will continue to watch, obviously?
Yeah, it was the latter. It was thinking I need to keep going bigger, and I need to keep getting this content richer and have more perspectives in it, and thinking beyond the game films, because the game films was predominantly what I was doing. The kicker was a lot of work and a big project, but the game films were sort of like my direction going forward.
Right.
And so I was thinking about the 2017 season and thinking, or 2018 season, sorry. Yeah, 2017 was all game films. And honestly, just to double back on that for 1 second, the Philadelphia Soul winning the Arena Bowl while I was filming them the entire season was, I have to say, it was one of the best experiences of my life by far. I mean, it was unbelievable being in that locker room, getting doused with champagne after spending a whole year with them. Like, that cranked up my enthusiasm and passion for this up to maximum levels. I was just like, whoa, okay, so this is what it can feel like when things sort of come together. Yeah. And not only that, but the team and the players were so into it. They were speaking to the camera more than they had in the past. I was getting a lot more attention from the players every single game.
Right.
And that was making the content way better. And then we went to the parade where after the Philadelphia Soul won, and they showed the film at the parade, and Darius Money Reynolds introduced me, and it was just like, what is happening? This is amazing. And so honestly, that's part of why I was like, okay, now I need to keep going. I need to keep going up. And so the Empire State was such a natural fit because it was this great story and this really emotional story. Like that's the thing I'm always trying to find. What's the emotion? And so having this team that was ripped away from the fans that cared so much about it, which is not always the case with AFL teams.
Yep.
A really diehard fan base, and getting back in touch with, a journalist that knew me when I was back there in 2009 interviewing players. And I emailed him and he was like, yeah, I'll do it, and get his perspective, reach out to Eddie Brown, get his perspective, Coach Keefe, it was so cool to go to the Empire's front office, before they had ever played a game, and talking to Bo Bell and catching up with him because he was with the Soul and before. And so all of those pieces made sense. And I was so familiar with that situation and familiar with the people that I was going to be talking to. It made it so much easier to gel that all together. And so I was so excited about it. And I think it sort of shows how into it I was.
Oh, for sure. Now, when it comes to these things, obviously, you had your original documentary, obviously the game films are the game films, but I would still separate your arena bowl game films separately, obviously, because they're telling a bigger story than your kicker series. Now, are you the type of writer director where everybody hears about storyboarding, and as an example, do you write the stuff down, Ben, that something pops into your head saying, okay, I want to do this, this, this? Because being a director as you are, there has to be some sort of layout, I'm sure, of how you're going to do a particular series or a particular film. Are you that type of director that you do this for all these series?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially for like the Empire State or Strap City, where you have multiple people talking.
Yeah.
And so you need to know, when you're asking them specific questions, how they're going to guide into what another person is saying in a different interview. And you need to really think about the map of how this is all going to play out when it finally is in the edit. And so with the Empire State, I was very specifically asking questions that were relevant to certain topics for certain people, and then they would piggyback on what someone else was saying, and sort of the ability to weave that all together. It can't just happen magically. So you really need to put all the pieces sort of down on a table, write out, 4 or 5 different interviews, and then start editing those interviews to mix them together to make it a cohesive thing.
Right.
So certainly even with Malachi, which was one person talking, I was still thinking, how are we telling this story? Is it linear? Are we showing, are we cutting back to the past? Are we cutting to the future? How are we doing it? And so it depends on the piece, but definitely I'm one of those guys.
Not much scripting. It's not reality TV, but there's not much scripting to it, I guess. I mean, because as I said, you have an idea in your mind of what you want to do. Obviously, you're basing it on what the players or your interviewers are going to say.
Right.
Have you, during any of this time during your series for the 50-yard series, were you ever thrown for a loop about something that was said, or how can you work it into an interview? Or because I said the 50-yard game film aside, everything else was kind of scripted. Did anything really surprise you at any point where you're saying, I never thought about that?
Yeah.
Or how are you going to work it in?
Yeah, there was a really interesting moment in the TT Tolliver interview where a very key piece to his story is what occurred that extracted him from the NFL, essentially, and forced him onto the path of the AFL. And it was something he wasn't comfortable talking about. So he mentioned it, but I had to cut it out. And so I was thinking, oh, geez, how am I going to make this a leap? And so that I don't even exactly remember how I did it, but it was one of those things where you just have to fit the puzzle pieces together in some other way, or use voiceover to guide it in some other direction. And that is definitely an element where scripting comes into play, which is like, where do you script certain elements? For VO, I decided not to use voiceover for most of the 50-yard shorts. Actually, I don't think. Oh yeah, there was like a short voiceover for the Empire State, but basically no voiceover for a lot of it. And so, if you're not using voiceover, you need the person's voice, their own voice, to guide you to the next topic. And so that was always the trick. That was always the game I had to play, was how do I get him to say something that is going to segue us into the next idea.
Okay. Now, I know the story when it comes to the Empire State documentary, and I at least want you to be able to tell the story again, because I'm trying to remember where you and I were, and you told me about how you were able to get your interview with Eddie Brown.
Oh my God.
And it's huge for you because, myself only meeting him, at the last Arena Bowl in 2019, that was my first time meeting him. But
Yeah.
your story is a hell of a lot better than what mine was. Tell those who don't know the story, tell us a story about how you found out about, especially because obviously he's such an integral part in your story.
Right.
For the
Exactly.
Empire State. How did
So
tell us your story about Eddie Brown and how you got to find out that you were going to interview him.
Yeah. So in the weeks building up to the first game that the Empire had played, I had already been to Albany. I interviewed Coach Keefe. I interviewed Bo Bell. I interviewed Mark McGuire, the journalist, not the baseball player. And so the other element to this that was such a major element to this was Eddie Brown. And so I knew Eddie was going to be at the home opener, but it was unclear how we were going to wrangle him because he was not living in Albany. So it wasn't like I could go to his house. So that was a big logistical concern, especially because of the time constraints of his arrival into the town and his departure after the game. And so I told the team, I was like, I really need this interview. And luckily the team, despite really not knowing me, some of those people were like taking me very seriously. I was like, I need this interview. And so I was like texting with Jordan, who was running the media for the Empire. And at the day of the game, John and I are down there. John's doing some photography for the game, and I was shooting it. And we're sitting in like a bar eating wings because we were so hungry. Or we ordered wings before the game because we were like pre-gaming, thinking this Eddie Brown interview is just not happening. I was like, I'll make the best of it. I'll figure something out. I'll use more of Coach Keefe's interview or use Bo Bell. And I was just a little bit down about it, but I was very excited for the game. Suddenly I get this text, Eddie Brown's available right now. And we were like, oh my God, fuck. So we like get up, we tell the waitress, I'm so sorry, you have to cancel our order. We run out of the place. We're literally running to the parking garage because we have a very short window of time.
And you I was in the arena at the time, and you texted me, I think, or I was on my way to the game. So
we're like, we're running to go to Eddie. We're running. We're carrying. I can't tell you how heavy all this camera equipment and lighting equipment is. We carry a full lighting rig, everything we need for the interview, in our arms. We're swinging it around, going to the hotel room. Both of us are like dying, sweating. We're just like totally out of it. And they're like, all right, Eddie's down here for you. He's in his suit. He guides us upstairs. I'm like, I can't believe what's happening. We're in the elevator with Eddie Brown right now. How is this real? And it's funny, like I never get nervous about meeting people in the AFL. I think I was so desensitized to it at a young age. I never really felt nerves about anything. Yeah. I just felt at home around people in the AFL, so I never really thought about it. But this interview, for some reason, I was nervous because I didn't know what Eddie's energy was. Like I always know more or less what people's energies are, and that's such a major part of interviews. And so Eddie was very serious when we first met him. He was like, hey man, like how you doing? Like it was sort of monotone, wasn't much in his eye that was like, hey, I'm actually excited to do this. It looked like maybe something he just wanted to get over with. And so we get up to the hotel room. I'm like frantically rigging this stuff. We're in this incredible hotel room, and he's off, I think, talking to Antonio Brown, the next room over. And so John and I are just like, what is happening right now? I can't believe this is happening. And he sits down. We start doing the interview. Midway or something, I start talking sort of off script about my experience with Albany, and he just suddenly, his demeanor and his entire disposition completely changes. He's like so much more excited now.
Yeah.
It's like Eddie really, 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 really values fans, and he didn't know that I was a fan or someone that was truly passionate about the AFL until I made it more clear to him because we had such little time to talk about it. And from that point, he really gave me like incredible sound bites. Totally, we left that interview just thinking, oh my God, the documentary was just made right there. Like that, without his pieces, without his emotion, without him like crying essentially on camera.
It was very close, yes.
Yeah, you can really feel it. And the footage, I mean, even fast forwarding to the game, when he's getting out of that car and he's like waving to the fans, I was just like, oh my God, this footage is so good. like you can rarely have a second to even think that while you're shooting because you just have to be so focused. But seeing Eddie waving in the crowd chanting Eddie, Eddie, I was so emotional holding this camera, trying to like keep my composure. It's just stunned at what I'm seeing and the emotion that's being expressed, by everybody. And all of that was so important to the documentary. That's part of why I look back on it and think, damn, that was really one of my favorite things I ever made in my life. And I might go to the grave thinking that.
I was about to ask you, compared to the experience that you had with the Soul at the Arena Bowl and going into the locker room and getting sprayed with champagne, is still the Eddie Brown thing higher than that?
That's a really good question. I would say that they are similar experiences. I think I was feeling different things. They were both sort of birthed out of nostalgia, like the feeling of filming Eddie Brown and the crowd being swept up and me being swept up. Like that was a very unique emotion to my life experience. And so was being in that Soul locker room, because when I was in that locker room, I was sort of experiencing vicariously through the players what it would have been like if the Dragons had won the Arena Bowl, or if all the dreams I ever had for all the teams I loved to win a championship, and sort of my entire love for sports was so baked into that feeling. Like, I don't think that feeling can really be topped. It was such like a unique high.
You're interviewing a legend.
Yeah. But the Soul stuff was just a unique burst of energy that only is topped by future times being in those locker rooms. But that one was really special, for sure.
Talk about, how did you come up with the other ideas for the 50-yard shorts, the Malachi story, the TT story, etc.?
Yeah, so Strap City, which was the Soul players, I felt was kind of an important story because not a lot of people think of defense when they think of the AFL. And I wasn't necessarily going to make something about AFL defenses, but this Soul squad was so special. And these are guys that I knew so well at that point. I was like, well, this is an easy topic. like this is something that I feel like I could just bang out. And so, I spent a day with them in their apartment. It was so funny going to like the Soul housing area and just like spending a full day with them. It was great. And I sort of just knew I was going to get good stuff from like Larico Stevenson, because like obviously, and James Romaine, I mean, they're going to say something amazing. So that one was not that hard to come up with. The TT one was really interesting because I knew I wanted to do something on the fact that he was the oldest position player in professional football. Like, that's such an interesting topic.
Yeah.
And so there was so much to mine there. And he was someone who I didn't know at all, unfortunately. Like, I just didn't know TT at all. And so that was a great experience coming to meet him. The Malachi one was similar to the Soul thing, where it was like, here's this young star who might be in the NFL by the time I release this. And so Malachi's such a great guy, really supports what I'm doing. And that sort of like synergy of him really loving it and me loving him as a person and player and like an icon in the AFL, it just was like, this is simple math. You just got to do it.
What were the one things that you did differently from each of the different levels of the 50-yard shorts? Because, we talk about the Malachi one, dude, you used a drone. So
yeah.
So
oh my God.
What were the differences that you wanted to put into it? Because as a director, obviously you have different ideas. Did you want to make sure that you added one new thing to each of the new shorts?
Yeah, certainly I was always sort of thinking of what spin can I put on this without breaking style, because I established a style and I was really, really wanted to stick with it. I actually didn't, because the first three have this very clean black background for the interviews.
That's true.
And for Malachi, like you were saying, by the time that I was shooting that, I was so in with the Empire and I was so in with the AFL as a league that I was like, I just got to take advantage of this. We're going to sit at center field and do this interview there. Like, there's a certain point where you have to like start making some concessions because there's just potential there. Like if I could fly a drone in an arena, I'm gonna fly a drone in an arena.
Exactly.
Like with Malachi running and flying a drone behind him, trying not to kill him with the blades. There was definitely always that thought. And another thing that I was always thinking about, at least in the first 3 episodes, was how can I use certain that's actually something I didn't mention. How can I use certain elements of each within each other?
Right.
So when I was shooting the Empire State, which was the first one I shot, I already knew in my head that I was going to do Strap City and something on TT. So I asked Bo Bell a question about TT Tolliver. I asked James Romaine about TT.
Smart.
Yeah, and I asked Keefe about the Soul defense. Like it gave me a lot to work with because it gave me these really nice crossover moments in those first 3 episodes where I can really tie them together. And that's just something, as someone that just sort of grew up with TV and loving the interlocking of stories and narratives, as you know, big Lost guy.
Yeah.
Like that's something I just always wanted. I wanted the cohesiveness. I wanted everything to feel like it's in one family. And so I think in the end we did get there, even though the Malachi one is definitely bigger.
Before we talk about the end of the 2019 season, obviously I want to know about how did these stories compare to the reaction to the original. I mean, I don't, as a director, there's only certain, you can base things on what you see on the, either on IMDb or on Rotten Tomatoes or stuff like that. How they're going to rate your, or in these days it's your views. Going through your entire series of everything that you've done, are you happy with the reaction that has gotten overall? The eyes that people have seen it, the people across the world that have seen your films now. Are you happy with how they all came out and how the reactions were?
Yeah, I think that growing up, like making videos and making movies and making commercials and stuff, I mean, this is not everyone's motivation, but for me, you want a captive audience. Like there's something very compelling about, you're not just telling a story into a void, you're telling a story to people. It's that connection that you're having with the viewer. And some people are like, I don't give a shit about the viewer. Like I'm making what I want to make. And sometimes you see some stuff that is pretty bad because I didn't think about that. But my thought has always been, I want that audience. I want to connect with an audience. And something that 50 Yard Dash gave me in such a rich way for 5 years was a captive audience. It was the players who cared every week what I was doing. It was the fans that tuned into these episodes and watched them and reacted and told me what they thought about them. And the Instagram account, which is like a whole separate thing kind of, which was posting every single day, getting thousands of views on there, sometimes in one day, and having genuine interactions every single day on that platform. It made it so worth it. I mean, that's the thing. Like I could have made 50 Yard Dash. I could have got some like, hey, this was great, whatever. And then I could have moved on. But what I would have missed out on was the depth of the connection that I made with so many people because I was talking to them every single day and they were reacting to what I was doing every single day. Yeah. And honestly, that's just something that I've always dreamed of. So there was some super highs, like the Empire State, when that released. I felt the power of the entire organization behind that. They made a press release. They pushed it hard. They notified media outlets about it. It was like the most I've ever seen some organization really try to get eyes on it. And a lot of people watched it. And it felt so good because I felt so passionate about that one story. And then, fast forwarding a bit, getting this shit on ESPN.
I mean, to ask,
yeah, that was the pinnacle of everything to me. And it's crazy that it happened in the last season. It's crazy that it happened with basically days left in the life of the AFL. But the eve of the Arena Bowl, finding out that they're going to air the Malachi documentary and the Empire State in sort of this like truncated, edited form on ESPN was just like insane. I mean, it was so many people watching, hundreds of thousands of viewers. It was everything you'd ever want. The AFL to that point had been heavily promoting what I was doing.
Yep.
And it just felt like boom, it finally happened. And for the league to go away right after that could be looked at from two perspectives, much in the way you could look at it from two perspectives when the Dragons folded, which is like, am I extremely depressed about this because this thing I loved and was going so well is now gone? Or do I actually feel very thankful that I got to experience the highest of highs that I could have possibly experienced doing this with the AFL, because I think this was the peak of what I could have experienced doing this with the AFL, and feel so gratified that that happened, in the final game essentially of the season and of the league's history. So that's my takeaway. I always think about that. It was really one of the best things that's happened to me, I think, in terms of like things I've been passionate about really paying off.
You got pretty good too when it came to your editing, because your 50-yard game tapes usually would take a couple days, and by the end you knocked out the Arena Bowl 32 one in less than, I think it was less than 36 hours, and doing a lot of it, while heading home. From the game itself, heading back home. So
we got this system down by that last year where I would drive to the game, Lauren would drive back, and I honestly so thankful that she did this while I had dosed on Dramamine so I wouldn't like get nauseous, editing in the car on the way back, have 5 social media clips ready to post, sending them to the league so that they could share them on Instagram and Twitter, while basically pulling out selects from the game to make the edit, get home, being awake till 6 a.m. From the previous night's game, just going hard. And like, I love that feeling of just going so hard, because I'm doing what I love, and I'm doing it to the max. Like, it's like being on steroids. And with the final film, the Arena Bowl game film, I had so many ideas about how I wanted to structure it. And so I got a lot of people, yourself included, to contribute their voices. And I did this pre-edit of the intro, and I did all the graphics ahead of time. And this pre-edit, which includes a sequence at the beginning that sort of has a summation of the season and some of the best highlights of the season, I really like that, because that's the final 50-yard dash thing that I made. And it feels very fitting and very like holistic, because it contains so much stuff and contains so much of 2019. And I think that it's maybe the cleanest thing I made. Honestly, like possibly, I don't know, you might disagree, but in terms of like front to back, it's just like a powerhouse of content. Like it's just my best stuff packed into one thing. And so I love kind of that I left it on that note.
It is, but as I said earlier, I think each of these different type of films that you did, they all are in their own kind of, their own space than others.
True,
because to me, it all began with the original documentary. And then from there, I would probably go Empire, then Malachi. But it's a tough 2-3. It's a very tough 2-3. Game films, I will agree with you. Your Arena Bowl 32 one, I think, is the top one because of how you did it. I mean, bringing in the mirrored look at the very beginning of the logo, of your logo itself. I mean, you grew from the first one to the last one. Looking at your entire history of the 50-yard series, is there any one thing that you may have had planned and you didn't do, or there was an idea that you wanted to do but you never got to do it?
I think that the thing is, it's a feature-length documentary. Like, that was when I first started what I thought my plan was. I thought I was going to release this. I mean, this is not my plan, but this is sort of what I was hoping. The league would be like, we really like this. We'll keep pushing this and hopefully maybe fund some sort of documentary. Now, at the time, I don't think I really understood what that meant. What that would have meant was the league was sort of making a commercial. And in retrospect, I don't think I would have really liked that. But the thing that I think I left on the table with the AFL is something that's like a feature-length film. The reason that I couldn't ever have logistically pulled that off was because I would have had to have essentially thrown away my career for a year and traveled the country interviewing people, licensing footage, doing a lot of like really expensive things to make something that possibly would have had no return on money. So like that was the reason I didn't do it. But when I look back on it, I think that's the one thing that I didn't do.
Right.
And so that I thought maybe I was going to do when I first started.
Did you even know at the current time that we're doing this, during this interview, you know, the league, as far as we know, is not going to come back. But did you ever think of doing one? Because you said you looked at the kicker, you looked at the different people within the league itself. Did you ever think of doing one on the fans, on particular fans, or a group of fans that you might be able to go back and do a retrospect on the league itself?
Well, I mean, I think I was thinking about it when the news first dropped, but I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying about having a captive audience.
Right.
I think at a certain point where you're no longer necessarily appealing to the same people you were appealing to, and no longer maybe making something for the audience you once had, with something like 50-Yard Dash, which is so much work. It's so hard. I loved it, but it was so hard to do. It's hard to invest that much energy into something that you don't think is necessarily going to have maybe even personal returns. So
Right.
My thought at the moment is that I'm probably completely done with doing any AFL content besides maybe occasionally posting something on Instagram and then doing the Hall of Fame stuff with you.
Yes.
But I think the door that is still open is possibly doing something with like the NAL or the IFL for fun. I wouldn't be taking it too seriously anymore, especially where I'm at just with my career and stuff. I don't. It's amazing that I even was able to pull off 50-Yard Dash, but I mean, it stretched me so thin. It was like, I mean, I was working like 30 days a week, basically, like doing this. And you know, I was like, at one point, I was like at the hospital for exhaustion. Like, I went all the way with it, and I'm really, really proud of that energy that I put into it. But like, it's hard to even imagine dipping back into it. Like, I feel very positive about how I left it, and so I don't necessarily feel like I want to open that door again for something that might not be the same quality.
What's one thing do you wish you had done better?
One thing I think I wished I had maybe made more stuff. I don't think I could have even possibly done it, but if I'm looking back on it, I wish I had I made probably 25, maybe 30 different videos, which is actually a lot. It is a lot. But something that the league and I have been talking about, we had this like really long conversation about what the future of 50-Yard Dash could be before the 2019 season, or maybe even right after the 2018 season. We were talking about like, what could this be? And I was talking with John Adams, and he was suggesting that we create this system where there's people in every city. 50-Yard Dash is sort of like the production house. You are producing it. You're like in charge of these teams of people and basically building out the concept of the game film and the short documentaries into a weekly series that's being handled by multiple teams of people, and as me like overseeing it. And so that was like a possibility at one point. And like we did the budget, we literally made budgets. Like we were pretty far into like flushing it out. And so I think if I could have done something better, it would have been progressing that further, covering more teams and more cities before the league contracted. And that's something that I think I could use in the future if I was to approach another league. Like, here's what I was thinking of doing. Here's what I did. I think we could grow from here.
You surprised me there with a story that I had never heard.
I don't know if I ever told you that.
Is there another story that I may know or may not know? Is there another story that you're able to tell about any particular thing, an experience that happened to you, besides the Eddie Brown stuff, et cetera? But I mean, is there anything else, a story that you are able to tell that people might find interesting when it came to how you did what you did, obviously?
Let me think for 1 second.
I mean, because I can only think of what it was like in the locker room after the Arena Bowl, your first Arena Bowl when you're taping that. I mean, I'm sure there were stories galore that you can't tell. You know, like certain players, they don't want us to tell certain stories, et cetera, et cetera. Anything that comes to mind?
I'm trying to think.
Or is the John Adams one it?
Well, yeah, I mean that was like really interesting because we were really talking about the future of the AFL and what we could do with this brand. And basically, the following season, I was reached out to by. I mean, this was a pretty big moment for me when I was in Columbus, ready to shoot that game film. Columbus is back. Return to Columbus and there for the Destroyers game. And my phone starts ringing while I'm shooting at Ohio State, like getting B-roll. And it's, it's someone from the league saying like, hey, this year we want to do something official. I was like, whoa, okay. Like finally, that was a big moment for me. That was a big moment for all of this. This is what I always wanted to happen. And it was a call where we were literally talking about money. Like we got down to details. I was standing on this lawn in front of Ohio State talking with the AFL about them licensing my footage and publishing my content. It was like someone had finally woken up and decided to talk seriously with me about this. After, besides John Adams, who was always in my camp. And so as the season went on, there were some delays in that project, but it really picked up steam later in the season and into the playoffs where I was really like making league for the content. Right. I mean, sorry, making content for the league. And then Monumental Sports called me, completely separate group of people, and they were like, "Can we buy your footage?" And I was like, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, like you have a lot of footage, right? Like, can we buy it? We're like doing packages for the streaming platform. We need content." And I was like, oh my God. I was like looking at my hard drive thinking the amount of footage on this stuff. What do they want from me? How much do they want to pay for it? It was very awkward because Monumental wasn't willing to pay what I thought it was worth for these like 4 years of extremely hard effort I put into gathering all this stuff. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want to let down these people who are finally opening the door to me. It was like, it was a tough situation to be in. But as a result of that deal, which was separate from the deal with the AFL, that was what got my stuff streaming on ESPN3 when that first started happening. So separate from the SportsCenter thing, this was the content that was airing like at halftime, and so that was like a major deal for me. Like it was really difficult to get through that. It was awkward and required a lot of thinking. Like, how am I going to approach this from a business perspective? Yeah. But ultimately, it all worked out, and I'm really glad I didn't like say I don't want to do this because it's not enough money. Like in the end, it was worth what it was worth it to me, which was finally getting my stuff out there to the most people possible. And so, from a business perspective, that was one of the most interesting things that transpired.
We know what happened at the end of 2019. How hard did you take? How hard did it hit you that the league folded, and it's very possible that it may never come back?
It's really interesting feeling. I remember the feeling in 2008 when it happened, and the like way that I spiraled because I was like so upset about that, and I was younger and less emotionally equipped to deal with something like that, where it's like your favorite thing is gone. It felt like a death, and so I was like, oh my God, I was so depressed. And so jump forward to now, I had already been through that experience. I already felt those things before, and every single day I spent around the AFL, I was thankful that it existed because I knew that at any moment it could go away. Every time a commissioner changes hands, every time a team folds, every time something happens that's a little bit suspect, your next thought is the league could fold at any second. And so I spent all my time shooting 50-yard dash being very thankful for what I had and being and focusing on putting out the most effort possible because of that. And so when the league announced it was being sued and that it was going to suspend operations and then ultimately fold, a part of me like knew that was going to happen somehow. It was like a part of me was already ready for that news. And so I didn't necessarily think, wow, my life is over in the same way that I thought that, 15 years before. It was just that I'm ready for this. This is obviously depressing and everyone's going to have to pick up the pieces. And I felt as an adult that was now earning money and living a life where that's really important, I was now like much more focused on the players and what had happened to the players, because these people's careers were just torn from them, and the best opportunity they had to make money playing professional football, probably for most of them, is gone. And so it was a much more like mature perspective that I had on it now.
Yeah.
And so those were sort of all the things that were swirling around to me. I mean, I think we were both sort of thinking the same things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Now, obviously, I know you didn't win a championship. You came very close to winning a championship because you're part of media that finally got his due. Finally you were recognized for what you were doing. And it took as you said, it took a front office to finally see that, and a transparent front office to do that. But out of everything that you have physically, as a fan all these years, what's the one physical item from the AFL that you own you'll always look at and remember the league fondly?
That is such a good question, Tim. That is such a good question. I have a lot of stuff, obviously, from the AFL, but something that comes to mind. Let me think about it for a second. There's a couple jerseys that I guess I'll pick two jerseys that I could think of. So one of them is Billy Parker's home game used jersey from the Dragons that he sent me, and that one is so important because Billy Parker was such a star to me. I mean, and I know he was to anyone at the time. A lot of people probably don't even remember Billy Parker now, if you're not a fan of the CFL. But he was a major defensive star in the AFL and was really like the face of the franchise for the Dragons besides Aaron Garcia. And so having his jersey from that period, while I did get that later, that's very important to me. And then the other thing that immediately comes to mind is a ball, a game-used ball that Terry Moss, who was a Dragons receiver in 2008, gave me for my birthday. And it's signed by the whole team. And, as however old I was when he gave it to me, it was like such a meaningful thing to be given. Like, to get a gift back from the AFL, like to not only be putting so much in, but to get like a token back, was so it just exemplified what the AFL was from like an emotional perspective for me. So I still have that. I mean, I still have it out because it's such a sweet thing that they did. They saw this kid that was like making cards for them and making videos and podcasts and stuff, and they were like, well, we should give him something for his birthday. That's just like, it's just, these big tough guys playing football thought to do that. And that's one of my favorite mementos from anything, really, I think. And then one last shout out, my Rodney Filer jersey, which I wore to every Dragons game. I will never forget the experience of wearing a jersey that's supposed to have pads in it that's really tight around my midsection.
That's the plus. What we loved about the AFL on what the team would do for somebody, and I think that your memorabilia that you have, that's perfect, dude. That really is, and I'm glad you're able to tell us about that. Finally, and I've asked this question quite a bit throughout the series of the historical podcast that we're doing, but I would like to ask you, if somebody were to come up to you in, let's say, the next 5 to 7 years or whatever it may be, and ask you specifically about the Arena Football League. Say you're wearing your Filer jersey. Yeah. And somebody asks you a question about the Arena Football League. How would you explain it to them?
I would say that the Arena Football League was one of the most unique and intimate professional sports leagues that ever existed, because it was a little engine that was attempting to operate on a national scale. And so it had players and people and fans from all over the country and all over the world as a result. It wasn't some local organization. And it brought an incredible amount of people together as a result of that. And it was a league that was focused on connecting the game to the people that were watching the game. And in those bonds formed something that no one else can touch. The walls that were separating the field from the stands weren't there separating the people from the players. They were just for safety. And it was truly this connection that the players had with the fans and that the teams and the communities had together. So it was the little engine that could. And in many ways, it was like a cockroach after an apocalypse. It kept surviving. And every time it came back, you found a different way to love it in a different way. And I will never forget all the various experiences that I had with the AFL because they definitely made me who I am today.
We'd like to thank Ben for joining us on this episode of AFL Rewind. If you want to see any of his work, you can head over to his website, and especially the 50-yard dash series that he shot for the Arena Football League. If you head over to fraternale.com, that's FRATERNALE.com, you can see all of his work, including that documentary series that he did produce. If you want to catch up on any of the episodes you may have missed from this historical series, there are a couple of places where you can do that. If you head over to SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and the audio version over on YouTube. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions on who you'd like to have on future episodes, you can email us at aflrewind@arenafan.com. And for everybody here at AFL Rewind, I'm Tim Capper. Watch the rebound off the net.